Welcome back to the Opt-In podcast, where we learn all of the secrets to thrive instead of survive inside of business settings. And today, one of those secrets is all about feedback. Feedback, you wonder, because the title said something very different. If you're wondering where the title came from and it caught your attention, Fuck Politeness comes from one of my very favorite podcasts, My Favorite Murder, and it is exactly like it sounds. It's a murder podcast. If you know me at all, you know that I'm an avid runner, and one of the things that I listen to while I am running, you've got it, murder podcasts. I know, it's crazy. I run super early in the morning, and all that I do is spend my time freaking myself out. Anyway, they have this concept that in order to keep yourself safe and protected and healthy, that sometimes you have to give politeness the middle finger. And I lean into that and I love it. I've probably been living this my entire life and just didn't have a way to talk about it. I'm sure that plenty of people that have told you that I will always give direct and being clear a pass instead of being polite and politically correct. And as I was listening to a podcast recently that they had recorded a few years ago. They were just doubling down on this language. And all of a sudden, I realized that what's happening in businesses today is very similar to what they were describing was happening in the world. And it's that we are all sacrificing ourselves. We are zipping our lips, not following our instincts for the sake of being polite. And this is happening in the workplace. I have an opinion that while this was always present and prevalent as a part of us going through a global pandemic together and needing to have more balance and, quite frankly, more grace with each other and our colleagues and our families, the outcome was that we defaulted to polite and we stopped being clear and direct and providing feedback. I have a firm point of view that politeness is killing feedback inside of companies. And as I started to dig a little bit into this and I started to think about what really is being polite, what does that mean? I, of course, went to the Webster's Dictionary because where else does one go who is an English major to find a definition except the OG source? And what being polite is it's behaving in a way that is socially correct. Did you catch that? Socially correct. And then secondarily, it shows understanding and care for other people's feelings. This stopped me in my tracks because let's be honest, and this is not going to turn into a political podcast or a state on current affairs. Everybody has a different opinion about what socially correct is these days. I can be standing in California and very strong in my belief that how I'm behaving, the words that I'm using, and how I'm interacting is socially correct. And as soon as you pick me up and you put me in the middle of Kentucky, I guarantee that how I behave and operate and act is not going to be deemed socially correct in all scenarios in Kentucky. So this is already our first problem. And then you start to apply other thoughts and methodologies. So how you are socially correct at a family function may be very different than how you're socially correct in a business function. Being polite is requiring you to understand context. It's understanding for you to be able to read the room and understand the nuances of human behavior enough so that you do not offend anybody. Because let's be very clear, socially correct is just another way of saying don't be offensive. Don't upset anybody. Don't rock the boat. Don't challenge the status quo. Just be. Get along to keep going along. And dang it, I want to say F that too. As soon as I realized what the definition of politeness was, I emphatically believe that this slang saying that I had picked up from one of my favorite podcasts was in fact one of the underlying diseases inside of corporate America and businesses today. We are all sacrificing true connection, psychological safety, and improving ourselves and others for the sake of being polite, for the sake of being politically correct, for the sake of being liked. And friends, that has got to stop. Because sooner or later, you're going to look up one day and realize that the way that you're behaving inside of a business is not the way that you behave in real life. Some of you have come forward to me and said, I'm at this crossroads where the culture of the company is completely misaligned to how I live my life outside. I feel like a double agent. I feel like I'm moving into what do I do? And the cause of that most often is that you have needed to suppress the feedback that you want to give, the directness that you want to have with your colleagues in order to maintain peace, in order to stay polite, in order to keep the status quo. The word polite is used so often, and yet we never really dive deep into what it means. So on the flip side, I said, well, if we're going to tell polite a big solid FU, what do we replace polite with? And my brain immediately went to kind. We should really be talking about kindness. And if any of you are on any social channels or listen to podcasts, you have run across Gary Vee at some point or another. And his mission in life is for all of us to treat each other with kindness. He is resolute in his conviction that with more kindness, the world will be a better place. We will all be happier. We will be more successful. We will solve a lot of the common ails that we have as a society and a world today if we are just more kind. Gary Vee stands for this. So the question then became, what exactly does kind mean? Kind means being generous and helpful and thinking about others' feelings. That's it. Nowhere in there does it say you need to be socially correct. Nowhere in there does it say you need to understand everybody and get to the common good. It just talks about how you behave without subjectivity, that you're generous and helpful, and that you consider the other people that are there with you. That's all. So if politeness is killing feedback, shouldn't we be heralding, like Gary Vee is, the triumph of kindness? Brene Brown has this quote that she says very, very often. She's been quoted all over the place, that to be clear is to be kind. And I find it really interesting because if you know Brene Brown, she's in the personal development space and she talks mostly about vulnerability. She's completed years and years and years worth of study, and she provides guidance and coaching around how to show up authentically you in a vulnerable space so that you can build real human connection with others. And through that lens, she says that providing clarity is the biggest kindness that you can do. And in a business setting, the easiest way to be clear is to provide feedback. See, it all comes back to this. If we let go of the mission of being polite and we double down on the mission of being kind, then that means the best thing that we can do is be clear and provide feedback as often as possible. So now I know what you're thinking. Melissa, feedback is subjective. It's rife with emotion. It can be argued and counterpointed. And let's be honest. Feedback is just as bad as politeness. Well, maybe that's for two reasons. One, we're trying to be so polite we can't be giving feedback well. And two, we don't understand what feedback actually is. So while I was in my rat hole of the Merriam-Webster's dictionary and I was looking up all of these words that we use all of the time, but none of us actually think about what the meaning is behind them, I said, well, if I need to know what politeness means and I need to know what kindness means, then let's go ahead and look up feedback and see what that means. And then that became the most interesting part of this entire thing, because you see, we're going to think about feedback with an example. Imagine somebody is on stage and they have a microphone in their hand, ready to give a speech and presentation. They're in front of the podium and they're talking and you're listening and you're highly connected and excited about what they have to say. And then they take a step to the right. and the microphone and speaker make some crazy noise because the microphone has gotten too close to the speaker and the speaker is giving feedback that there's interference. That action of bringing the microphone closer to the speaker created feedback. Oh, you're too close. We can't function the way that we are. And when you move back to your spot, or maybe even a little further to the left, and the feedback disappears, you're also getting negative feedback telling you that's the right thing. You're in a better position now. So if feedback is a response to an action, then when you look at the definition, this all makes sense. Feedback is an evaluation or corrective information about an action. Just like microphone and speaker too close together creates a noise, all that it is it's information about an event or action or a process, and it's giving that feedback to the controlling source. So in this case, the speaker was telling the microphone, you're too close. Or the speaker is telling the person holding the microphone, you got too close. All that it is providing information about an action that was taken so it can be corrected. That's all that it is. This is an exchange of information. This is almost the exact same definition as cause and effect. You do this is what happens. Let's talk about it. It has nothing to do with subjectivity. It has everything to do with facts and a basis for communication and argumentation. So if you continue with me a minute for this microphone and this speaker situation, this can transmit itself to any facet of life. For example, think about a baseball player. They're up at bat, they're standing at home plate, and they swing. And they connect with the ball, but it goes foul. There's a noise that's made when that happens that the batter understands and says, oh, I swung too late. They know that the next time, based on the feedback that the bat gave the batter, that they need to swing earlier. And the next pitch that comes down, they swing a little bit earlier, and the ball soars, going over the left field fence line and staying fair. That is feedback. In a business setting, exactly the same thing can happen. Think about a time where you have given a presentation and you're on stage, or you see a presentation and you're on stage and you go through all of the material, and at the very end, somebody cheers from the crowd or starts the clapping from the audience. Again, that's feedback. It's telling you that you did a good job. It's telling you what level of excellence you did that at. Now, if it's a lukewarm applause, you know you didn't really do that well. If you got a standing ovation, on the other hand, you nailed it. It is a direct piece of information provided to you, the controlling source, about the action that you took. That's all that feedback is. You'll notice in the definition, it doesn't talk about being socially correct. It doesn't talk about being polite. It doesn't talk about being kind. There's nothing in there about having empathy and sympathy and all of those things. It's simply the transaction of providing information after an action is taken to the controlling source of the action. Now, I might have lost you because I know that this gets a little sciencey and dull. The point that I'm trying to make is that we have muddied the waters. We have taken all of these snippets that we receive in leadership training and management training and sensitivity training and harassment training and etc. And we've started to mash them together. And then we get a confused, muddled situation where we don't know exactly how we're supposed to be behaving in a scenario. And all of this compounds, all of this creates an environment where feedback dies. And this isn't a perfect situation. This isn't a company that has a completely healthy culture where there isn't any toxicity around and everybody is really just trying to do the right thing and keep the peace. Because you see, there's also this underlying narrative that feedback is going to cause strife, that feedback is confrontational, that feedback will cause people to get upset. And quite frankly, friends, they might. Let me be really, really clear here. Some people love feedback, and other people are going to fight you on it tooth and nail. It's just who we are. It's just how we're made up. It's the limiting beliefs that we carry. It's our composition. It's all of the life experiences that we've had leading up to now. When you decide that right now, this second is the time to provide feedback. What I will tell you, though, is if you find somebody receptive to feedback or you yourself are receptive to feedback, you're going to become a better human by listening to it, taking it in, and then deciding what to do next. So I have given these stories a couple of times, but I'm going to talk about a time early in my career where I had a huge ego and I thought that I knew everything. And candidly, I did have a leg up on most of the people in the room. I had domain and industry expertise that they didn't have. I had time and seat that they didn't have. So I did, from an intellectual standpoint, know other things that other people didn't know. With that said, when you're problem solving and you bring forward knowledge and expertise, you need to be open to how that's received, interpreted, digested, and then the potential solutions that can be brainstormed as a result of the information that you've shared. Just because you own a lot of facts and knowledge does not mean that you own the keys to the appropriate solution to a problem. This is where I failed. So often when I would get into meetings, I would speak very fast. I would kind of bulldoze everybody that was in the room. And then I would assume that they had all stayed caught up with me and on track. And before I knew it, I was proposing a solution and I had lost them all in the second sentence. Not only that, I had so much ego that I had walked into the room with that nobody wanted to listen to me anyway. And even if I was right, which often I was, they were going to say I was wrong just because I was being so difficult. And I was of the opinion that they were the problem. And so after many, many frustrating meetings where we weren't getting anywhere, I went to a member of our leadership and I said, I think we've got a really serious problem here. The team is not willing to do the right thing. And I literally got laughed out of the room. Literally. And what I was told was that the problem wasn't the team, the problem was me. And I was further given very specific feedback about a meeting that had just happened where I didn't listen to anybody. I didn't give time for brainstorming and for us to kick the can. And I just assumed the close. I just assumed everybody was going to agree with me. I just assumed that my way was the right way. And everybody in the room got pissed off. And so they banded together and said, well, if she thinks it's the right way, we all think another way is the right way because we are just not going to agree with her. And I heard the feedback and it made me angry and I didn't agree. And I took off. And then as I sat with it over the next few hours and the evening, and I came back in the next day, I said, you know what, there's probably some merit to this. And so I went back to that same leader and I said, you know, I heard what you had to say. I don't necessarily agree with everything. What would you have done differently in that scenario? And that was when he very politely and kindly, I just use the word polite because he was absolutely socially correct, built me back up and then tore me back down because that was the way that we gave feedback back then. And what he said was that I did have the right answers and I did know all of the information I believed that I knew. And I wasn't giving everybody enough time to catch up. I wasn't making room for other thoughts and opinions. I was short-sighted, and that if I wanted to grow my career and develop into a leader, I needed to carry people along until they understood and were comfortable with the solution I already knew was the right one. That I had to have patience. That I had to learn when to stop talking, that I had to learn when to stop arguing, when I had to learn how to walk away and come back later. And as painful as it was to hear all of that, he was so clear and direct with me using the meeting before as an example that I had no other option than to consider what he said as true. And so from that moment on, that started my journey of realization around how I was doing this everywhere. Because let's be clear, when you're in your early 20s, whatever you're doing at work, you're doing at home, because this is just who you are natively. And that moment, that piece of feedback that I was given, that getting laughed out of his room just for me to come back in the next day, changed my life. It changed my life because I finally saw my biggest limiting action. I finally saw how the rest of the world was perceiving me, and I saw how I was getting in my own way. Now, I'm not going to tell you that going from there to where I am today was an easy journey. I mean, heck, it's been 20 plus years as I've been working through this. But what I can tell you is that very quickly I learned to shut up and sit down and listen. And no, it wasn't perfect. And no, I was not graceful as I was going through it. And yes, I damaged some relationships along the way. And yes, I learned from it all of the time. The environment where I was continuously getting direct and specific feedback because I asked for it and everybody knew I was working on it enabled me to change the behavior. Because I was getting corrective feedback after an action, I was able to make the changes necessary to grow and develop and become what I am today. I guarantee you, if I had not received that feedback, we would not be talking here on the podcast today. You would not see me in the C-suite. I would have gotten stuck somewhere in middle management, and me personally would have been miserable because I was made for more. So for me, I will emphatically always say that feedback is one of the most important things, good, bad, or indifferent, that you can get from another person, and that giving feedback is being kind. And the more clear and specific feedback is, the kinder you are to the other person. Now, it goes to say that feedback can also be given through the lens of empathy. No, not sympathy. And empathy is the ability for you to share someone else's feelings and experiences. So as you are being clear and as you are being direct and as you are giving the feedback, you can also stand in their shoes and understand what their point of view was, what they were trying to achieve and accomplish. And you can give the feedback, you can wrap it in such a way that is full of empathy and is also incredibly kind and clear and direct without being polite. You can weave all of these things in to create your own specific and distinct formula for feedback. The important point is that this is not a time to be socially correct. This is a time to be kind and clear. So if we're talking a little bit about why feedback is important, because I think that gets missed a lot. There's a lot of training out there around how to give feedback. I'll hit on a couple of points just so we can do this and we can always dive deeper in the Intentional Career Collective and do a training really around feedback and do some role play. But I want to talk today around why it's so important, because this gets lost in the messaging. So, I've explained that being kind is incredibly important and that we can just tell politeness to take a walk. And that, according to Brene Brown, being clear is kind, and that clarity comes from providing feedback in a timely manner. And so when you think about why feedback is important, the very first thing is that it improves performance all the way around. It improves the performance of the employee receiving the feedback. It improves the performance of the team because they see that the feedback is given. So if you're the leader giving the feedback, you accumulate additional trust from your team. They rally around you a little bit more because they see you standing up and having the difficult conversations and attempting to improve the environment. Giving feedback also equals improved performance because you're helping somebody perform better in their role. You're helping the person be better at what they're attempting to do. Improved feedback comes both from the person receiving the feedback as well as the greater good. And what I will also tell you is that your performance, if you're the one delivering the feedback, also improves. Because every time you set up a feedback session, every time you prepare to give somebody else feedback, it's teaching you to observe. And by default, it opens your eyes to observing yourself. You can find deficiencies within how you're behaving. You can find opportunities to improve your performance purely by preparing to give somebody feedback on theirs. Giving feedback can improve performance all the way around for a multitude of reasons, and having a culture where feedback is king will fast track you into a high-performing team. The second thing is you as an individual should be asking for feedback. You should be seeking it out. If you want to grow professionally, if you want to be a better person from a personal development standpoint, if you want to be really good at what you're doing, you should be asking for feedback. And when you ask for feedback, the benefit of feedback and why it's important is because it puts you in the driver's seat. Now you have this laundry list of things that you should be developing and that you should be changing and that people would like to see you improve. And then you can decide where you're going to double down and develop yourself. You're going to decide what goals you want to set and what's most important to you and what's going to move the needle. It gives you an entire buffet of options on what you want to spend your time mastering. By getting external feedback, you have the opportunity to see through another set of eyes where you have opportunity to grow and develop. And when you're proactive in asking for feedback, it shows you're open-minded and receptive. It shows that you are willing to grow. You are then known as somebody that doesn't shy away from the difficult conversations, from somebody that doesn't shy away from the challenging circumstances. Asking for feedback puts you in the driver's seat of your own development. Another reason that feedback is important is because it can actually diffuse office conflicts before they happen. I know it sounds crazy, right? But if you think about these scenarios where conflicts arise and they become heated, it's often because everybody has been polite for a very long time and topics have been simmering, and then somebody explodes, or a few somebodies explode, or you get to a point where you're trying to negotiate and then everybody's had it with everybody and they explode. When you say F politeness and you double down on feedback and a kind environment, then that diffuses conflict. It opens up channels of communication. It creates and fosters an environment where, as an action happens, you can provide the corrective information to the controlling person, the person that took the action, so they can make adjustments. Just like the batter in the batter's box gets feedback from the noise that happens when the ball hits the bat, if the team is providing itself feedback in significant loops on an often recurring basis, then behavior starts to adjust. And when behavior starts to adjust and self-correct, you avoid conflict. It diffuses the situations. Emotions don't run high. And if you're doing it absent of politeness, you become a well-cohesive team that performs at its absolute best. Another reason that feedback is important is it improves employee engagement. If you have an environment where there's a two-way feedback loop and everybody is comfortable giving each other feedback and receiving feedback, employees believe that they are seen and heard by leadership. Employees experience that their opinion and their beliefs and their requests are valued and acted upon. And that has the employees double down and buy into the organization. It has them come in and help try to solve problems for themselves and others. By creating an environment of feedback, you are asking employees to be actively engaged in improving the circumstances. Environments where there is no feedback have employees that are incredibly disconnected. Often they don't have any psychological safety and they're quite scared. They don't know where they stand. They don't know what is going to happen next. They don't know if their colleague will work with them or try to sabotage them. Environments where feedback is absent are ones where everybody is highly critical of another and is looking over their shoulder to see who's coming at them next. In an environment with feedback, you have open two-way communication. You have a trust-filled culture. And you have one that understands that feedback is the pathway to improved performance and development. The easiest way to improve employee engagement is to implement a culture of feedback. Another reason that feedback is important is because, candidly, it just creates better relationships. If everybody's walking around being polite and surface, they don't really know each other. And there's probably some things that bother each other about each other. So they're off in the corner being snarky and talking about Sally because, they didn't like how she did her presentation. If you create an environment where feedback is readily available and is readily given, The team bonds. The team trusts each other. Colleagues work together and understand that if something is going kind of sideways, that they can give the other person feedback. It's going to be well received. They're going to work through it and move on. If feedback doesn't exist and you say that what's more important is politeness, that's when toxicity is introduced. That's when strife is introduced. That's when conflict arises. We all want high-performing teams. We all want to get along with our colleagues. We all want to show up and do a really good job. And the easiest way to be able to do that consistently with integrity and joy, quite frankly, is by operating in an environment that's feedback friendly. And then the last thing that it does for you, whether you're an individual contributor or a leader, is it improves your leadership skills. Think about it. Giving somebody feedback, good or bad, quite frankly, can cause some anxiety. Think about the last time you had to give some feedback. Did your heart rate go up a little bit? Your palms get a little bit sweaty? Did you avoid having the conversation for 2, 3, or 4 hours? All that is nerves. All that means is that you're not confident in your ability to have a productive, thoughtful, kind conversation. As you provide more and more feedback, and we'll talk a little bit about just how to give feedback at a high level, as you do this over and over, you work the muscle. And then giving feedback becomes second nature. And then others begin to see you as a leader because they see that you're willing to collaborate and help somebody else succeed, and that you're willing to have tough conversations and help them build an action plan so that things can improve. Providing feedback shows that you care about the people that you work with. And what people want in a leader is that they can be transparent and that they can be trusted, and that they do, in fact, care about their employees and the outcomes of the business. And so providing feedback can improve your leadership posture. It can actually help you climb the leadership ladder. Because the more feedback you give and the more kind you are, the more your colleagues and peers and senior leaders are going to see the value of you as an employee and to the team, and you will deliver greater business value to the organization as a whole. Being somebody known to give feedback is one of the secret keys to how you can fast track your career on a leadership trajectory. So with all of that said, there's many other reasons as well about why feedback is important. The thing is that if you don't do it correctly, that's all for naught. You only realize those benefits when you're giving feedback in a very specific way, following a very specific formula. Now, go out there and Google it. You'll find 5, 6, 7 different acronyms about how to give feedback. They are all very similar and come down to the same things. The very first thing is it needs to be timely. So the action happens, you make the observation, you give the feedback. Ideally, same day. If you can't do it the same day, the next day. If you have to wait the weekend because it happened on a Friday, fine. But really don't allow this to go longer than 24 hours in a business cycle, because you want to be timely. You want it to still be present in their mind and your mind. And here's the thing is, if you can't do it immediately upon it happening, then immediately upon it happening, you go sit down and you write down everything that you observed. What behaviors did you see? What was their tone of voice like? What did they say? How did the room react? What feedback would you give specifically about how to do things differently? What potential solution options are for making improvements? Literally brain dump everything about what you just observed and any thoughts that you have. This will allow you to record in the moment the emotions that were brought up, the emotions you read off of other people, what exactly was said. You'll have it all documented, because I guarantee you, even 2 hours later, you're not going to remember half of what happened. So the very first thing you're going to do is write it all down. Then the thing that you're going to use that for is for giving timely feedback. So that's your basis for keeping a record of what actually happened. When you give the feedback, you need to be specific. So those notes are important. You need to talk about specifically what meeting and what they were talking about in the meeting and who they were talking to and what specifically happened. And here is where you need to be real careful with not being polite, because if somebody picked up their phone in a meeting and did, kind of one of these things where they're staring at their phone and somebody else is talking, and that was perceived as rude, what you're going to want to say is, in the meeting on Friday at 3:30 in the afternoon, when Sally was giving her presentation on dog collars, you picked up your phone and started scrolling. And that made Sally feel like you didn't value what she had to say. That's how you get feedback. What you don't want to say is, in that meeting on Friday, at some point you picked up your phone and you were scrolling through and you really hurt Sally's feelings. That's really not really helpful. So you want to be timely. You want to be specific. You absolutely need to do this in private. Do not do this in the hallway. Don't do it in the meeting live. Don't do it in the middle of cubicle land. Don't do it in a Zoom call where there's a bunch of other people. If you're in a Zoom call and you ask them to stay a few minutes after, close the call and open a new one. That way there's no hangers on. There was not that guy that was on mute that was a call-in user 25 that you thought was fake and phony and a bot. They're all gone. Nobody can overhear it. Give the feedback in private, positive or negative. Always do it in private. And then, and this might be the most difficult thing for you to do. So you've gotten yourself all prepared. You know exactly what you want to say. You know the solutions you want to present. You do it, and then they want to talk about it. And you internally are doing an eye roll. Like, do we really have to go through this? Do they really have to challenge me? Yes, they do. And you need to listen. So after you've gone through and you've given your feedback and you've been specific and you've provided examples and you've been timely and you did it in private, then you need to be quiet and you need to listen to them. Take in their observations, take in their reactions. Do not get into an argument with them. Just hear them out. And then the last thing that you're going to do is identify next steps together. And the next steps could be a variety of things. If it's an emotionally charged conversation, which sometimes they are, then you agree when you're going to meet again to talk about next steps. You don't need to solve all of the problems in that meeting. If they're receptive to the feedback and they want to work through some ideas on how to improve, then you come up with an action plan there. The action plan must also include how you're going to check in with each other and make sure that the action plan is set in a time-bound way. You want to understand how you're going to measure whatever it is that they're trying to do, and in what time frame you're going to do it. And with this conversation, make sure that you have a little bit of grace. If they're not ready to talk about solutions, give them time and just agree on when you're going to come back and talk about it in the future. That being said, the future is 48 to 72 hours. It's not 3 weeks. That's really all that it takes. You can find a lot of processes and approaches to this, like I said, but the bottom line is that this formula works. And the more you do it, the more second nature it becomes. The less notes you have to take about what you observe, the faster the conversations can go, and the less worked up you get. Your nervous system is able to handle these conversations the more that you do them. And it's never fun to be on either end of feedback that's constructive necessarily. This is where the growth comes in. When you are both uncomfortable, that's when you're going to become better humans and better professionals. And the last note that I'll make is that when you're on the receiving end of feedback, it's incredibly important that you're open-minded. The fact of the matter is you're going to get feedback that you do not agree with. We all get feedback that we don't agree with. We sometimes get feedback we don't agree with until 3 or 5 years down the road when we're like, oh, yeah, when they told me that, they were so right. If only I had listened and done something about it then. And sometimes we're going to get feedback. We're like, yes, that is exactly what I needed to hear. That's exactly the action plan. I'm so stoked to improve this area. No matter which end of the spectrum you're on, or if you're in somewhere in the middle, be open-minded, be receptive, and do not argue. Take in the information that they have given you and decide what you choose to act on and what you don't choose to act on. Be grateful that they had the courage to provide you feedback, even if it makes you uncomfortable and you disagree. Because this demonstrates that the company is invested in you as a professional and that they want to see you succeed and that they want to see you become the best that you can be. It's difficult to do this in a situation where you feel like you performed better than they're saying. If you can approach it with gratitude and grace, you will find some nugget that you can take forward and that you can improve. You can find some nugget that you can build an action plan around. you will find some nugget that you can get excited about and you can double down on, something that you can build an action plan around so that they can see that you take the feedback and that you react to it. And also that leaves you comfortable that you can deliver on what you're committing to modify, learn, and grow. In an environment where feedback is dead because politeness reigns supreme, a lot of this is easier said than done. So what do you do if you work inside of an environment where feedback doesn't happen? Where everybody is incredibly polite and nobody is real? Well, it's quite simple. You start asking for feedback. That's it. From everybody. You ask your peers for feedback. You ask your cubicle neighbor for feedback. You ask your manager, you ask your manager's manager, and it can be anything. Was there anything that you would like to suggest that I do differently in the presentation the next time, the actual materials? How was my tone of voice in that meeting? Did I speak too fast? Was I too quiet? Was I easy to hear on the phone? Ask for feedback constantly. The more you ask for feedback, the more comfortable other people are going to get to giving you feedback. The more people that are comfortable giving you feedback, the more people are going to say, well, if she's asking those questions, I wonder what the answers would be for me. And then they're going to start asking for feedback. And the more people that ask for feedback, there are more people that are comfortable getting feedback. And as soon as you're comfortable getting feedback, you're comfortable giving feedback. Slowly but surely, you can at least create a team environment, even if you're an individual contributor, where feedback becomes the norm. You do not need to wait for the CEO or HR or the executive of your area to say, we are now giving feedback and this is how it's working and everybody's getting trained. You don't need to wait for that. You don't need to go to HR and ask if they can buy training for you. All you have to do is start. All you have to do is decide when you come to work tomorrow. At some point during the day, you're going to ask somebody for feedback about your work. That's it. And then you start the journey and you will be amazed at the transformation that will happen. So thanks for sticking with me today on my soapbox about feedback. I have been sitting on this one for a little while because I wanted to play around with the politeness kind of point of view. And I feel very strongly after talking to a lot of business professionals over the last week that if there was more feedback inside of companies, people would have better clarity around what they could do to professionally develop, and their careers would be advancing faster at the clip that they wanted. If you found anything in this episode valuable today, I have a really exciting offer for you. We have just recently opened the Intentional Career Collective. It's a community of business professionals who are joining together to learn, grow, receive mentorship, and design their careers intentionally so they can live the life that they dream of. Currently, we're offering a founding members price where you will get lifetime access in this founding members price for as long as you're a member to all of our exclusive trainings, our weekly mentorship calls, and much, much more inside of the community. I would love for you to be one of our founding members. Take a look at the link in my bio and learn more. If you have any questions at all, feel free to DM me or you can email me at melissa@melissafranks.com and I will answer any questions that you have about the Intentional Career Collective. I hope to see you there as one of our founding members, and I am so looking forward to talking to you again next week here on the Opt-in Podcast. Until we meet again, friends, please remember that you are strong, wise, and capable, and I believe in you.